Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy.
Well, greetings everyone. It is Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy, for our 6th episode of Candid Conversations About Care with the Caregiver Lawyer and my good friend Amanda Singleton. Amanda, it's great to visit with you again. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be back.
Now, I'm not going to be overtly sad that this is our 6th podcast. I'm not going to say our final podcast because I have a feeling we're going to do a few more of these. What do you think?
I think absolutely.
I think so too. But let's remind our listeners. Yeah, let's remind our listeners what we've been discussing over our 6 series. In episode 1, you told just your beautiful story about your caregiving experience with your mom, and then we moved on to episode 2, which was the essential legal documents for caregivers. Episode 3, we had a really special guest. I think, what was his name? Ryan something, right? Ryan Singleton.
Yeah, it's a shame this is not a video because, he is so handsome, and I just think the listeners missed out. But yeah, a very special guest, my husband, who came on, and he talked about debt that so many caregivers experience, and as my husband and going through this life with me, and then being a board-certified consumer debt attorney, he sees it every day. So I thought that was a great episode. I really loved that. He came in and did that. It
was great to meet him and have him on the show. And I don't know, maybe the two of you should be tag teaming on a podcast here and there. Just kind of throwing that idea out. But that was episode 3 entitled Caregiver Debt. And then we had another guest for episode 4, Long-Term Care Planning. And that was Christina Pinto. It was a great conversation with Christina. And then
it was also a family caregiver.
Yeah, also a caregiver. Yeah. And goodness, she is another one that we probably could reconnect with. And we're just touching the surface on all these topics that we've discussed over the last 6 weeks. So it might not be a bad idea to give Christina a call. And then, goodness, last week we talked about navigating the medical maze with Dr. Ozzy.
Yeah, talk about scratching the surface. I think we could do a whole series just on that.
Very much so. And I think, you see, I tickled you. Looks like we've already got a plan to do more podcasts. But today we're going to talk. There is so much to cover, and that's why it's so important. And I know you kind of agree with this. I know that's why it's so important to kind of get the information out through story sharing, because I know you agree with this. It's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause. And we certainly know there's millions and millions of caregiver stories that are out there that connect to these causes, especially on the legal needs of all the caregivers.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, today we're going to talk about, the title of our podcast today is Everyone Needs an Advocate. But, as we were talking a little bit earlier before I hit the record button, that there's actually 2 roles where caregivers can become advocates. One, and we'll talk about this first, it's one while you're in the midst of caregiving. But there's another component to advocacy that continues on once caregiving ends. And we're going to get into both of those areas this morning. But what do you think, Amanda, when you're in the middle of caregiving? What does advocacy mean to you?
Oh, wow. That is such a great question. I think that the life BC, the life before caregiving, it doesn't occur to us how much and to what lengths we will go, to make sure that life is really as the best it can be, for someone that we love when they can't do for themselves or speak for themselves for whatever reason. And so then so many of us are thrown into caregiving quickly. It's not always a long-term coming thing. And all of a sudden you find yourself speaking for someone else and being their voice. And in being their voice, you really learn what it's like to advocate, whatever it's for, whether it's for the best medical care, for more information, for better services. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot of strength that we didn't know we had, a lot of grit. And, realistically, when you have the right tools, advocacy becomes a lot easier. The right resources and the right organization can make all the difference in making you a stronger advocate.
You hit on two things. One, I'd like to kind of dive into organization. And the other that you mentioned that really is critical about organization is not too many people plan to be caregivers. You're thrust into this role, and all of a sudden, and you said it very well, you're all of a sudden speaking for somebody else and somebody else's needs. And how do you get organized for that? It's hard.
It is. It is hard. And we know enough now to know that in a decade, we're going to have more people who need care than people who are going to be able to provide it. So this is just a reality that no one should really be blindsided by the caregiving experience, and they will, and that's okay. But there are many of us out here in this industry who are trying to create this awareness because there is a lot of planning you can do. And, as we talked about in week 2 and then kind of touched on in all of the episodes in this series, that if you do some of this planning in advance, then life can be, I wouldn't say easier, but a little less like whack-a-mole when the issues come up with caregiving,
Right. Right, and some of that just really centers around having these open and honest conversations, and we talked about that also in week 2, that being proactive about your care, that goes a long way in making an emergency just a little less stressful than it already is, just by the situation itself.
Right, and it's a gift to your loved ones to do this. It's not even your perspective caregiving. It's perhaps someday you'll be cared for. And if you get yourself organized, what a gift to your partners, your spouses, your children, your friends, whoever it is who are going to be your care partners, for you to say, you know what, I thought about this and I had a plan.
Oh, goodness. That touches me because we hear so many stories about people who haven't had a conversation about what they want, especially at end of life, and the stress that just really puts on the caregiver to make those decisions. Because when you're an advocate, and really, I know you'll agree with this one also, advocacy is probably the most important role that a caregiver fills. But
yes, we're the front line.
You're the front line. You're the voice, but in order to be comfortable in knowing that you're doing the right thing, you have to know what the person wants that you're caring for.
Right. Yeah. And then you never have to guess live your life and second guess, which nobody wants. There's a word we don't like, guilt. And people, if they feel like, well, maybe I could have done it differently, then they're carrying that. And if we can erase that possibility, wouldn't that be wonderful?
Oh, goodness. Live your life and second guess. Wow. That was pretty powerful, Amanda.
I have moments.
You have a lot of moments, goodness. But yeah. So the other thing about advocacy that really kind of hits home for both of us, and I might get just a little bit emotional here. Yeah, because as both of us know, there comes a time when caregiving ends, and we are obviously filled with a lot of emotion when the end does come. But then when we sit back and we think about all the knowledge that we've gained and the experience that we have, and I certainly understand that not everybody is comfortable sharing experiences like you and I appear to be by being so present in people's lives. But there's another part about advocacy that when caregiving ends, that we could really be conduits for caregivers that are coming behind us.
Yes, and I agree. It's not for everyone, and it's not for every situation. Personally, I had never spoken publicly about my father's mental illness and his suicide until this year, and it's been 5 years, and wow. I bore that primarily alone. Aside from a small circle and some of my own mental health and grief support, but sometimes people just aren't ready. They're not ready to share what they've been through and what they learned along the way. But when you are and when you can, then it's wonderful because you're walking a road that someone's going to walk as well behind you. And if there's anything, just even the empathy that you can share and say, I've been here, I've done something like what you've done, and my heart goes out to you, that means a lot to me. I should mention, since our last podcast, I have come on with AARP as one of their resident caregiving experts on their online forum, where people can go on and click on the caregiver forum and talk about their caregiving experiences. And my hope is that maybe some of these caregivers who have lost their caregiving jobs, be it that someone gets better or that they pass away or there's some other type of parting, that they don't 100% abandon that part of their life, that they integrate the fact that caregiving was a part of their life, it may be again someday, and share that experience. Life after caregiving, you are forever changed.
It is, and it does happen in our own time. And I certainly want to emphasize that advocacy comes in different forms, different shapes, different styles. But two good friends of mine, Joni Aldrich and Christopher Jerry, they wrote a book called Advocacy Heals You. And I think they hit the phrase right on the target, because I can speak for me here, and I'm pretty sure I can say this for you as well. The advocacy has played a part in my healing.
Absolutely. It got me out of feeling sorry for myself, really. In the early days, I would do some just pro bono legal work for other people who had cancer. And that, I said at the time, this is the one thing that I'm doing that doesn't revolve around my mom, and it doesn't revolve around me. I'm so in my own grief, and doing this for someone else gives me the opportunity to be useful. People like to feel useful. They do. To feel useful and to help. Helping others is often a huge path to healing, and I can certainly say it was for me. And also that drive to say, I perceived ways this could be easier, so why don't I try to make it easier for others,
Yeah, I think you've heard me use the phrase before. I'm kind of the poster child of what not to do after caregiving ends.
Right.
So,
Oh yeah.
So,
and I hear you. Oh man, I just because I've done this a few times, I just not mean that the next time it comes up that I'll be a cool customer and know what to do, But at least we know to ask the questions and
right.
to reach out.
And I think the number one aspect in caregiving, and I'm pretty sure we hit on this on all 6 of our podcasts, and it comes back to advocacy again. You have to be able to, not only you're advocating for the person that you're caring for, and you and I were both lucky enough to care for somebody that we truly love.
Yes.
I also understand that there are many listeners out there, many people that we've come in contact with that end up being caregivers by default and end up caring for somebody, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a spouse that they might have had issues with over the past, and they have unfinished baggage.
Yes.
Even in that role, when you do it as, and I like to say, caregiving by default, it's equally as important to be able to advocate for yourself in during that time as well. Make sure that
critical.
taking care of your own needs, and that really goes true for all caregivers. But advocacy comes full circle. We have to advocate for ourselves too while we're in the middle of caregiving, and especially after caregiving ends. We forget about taking care of ourselves.
I agree, and that conversation of self-care is it's ever present, but sometimes when you're in it, it's not impactful. And part of advocating for yourself is being realistic. Every caregiving situation is temporary. Whether it's maybe temporary for a period of a decade or more. But this will not be life forever. The guarantee is that life will always change. But you always have to take care of yourself because you're going to live this life, before, during, and after caregiving. So take the best care of yourself that you can and really do the self-care things and don't isolate and bear your burdens alone. And that's a huge part of advocating for yourself. There's no reason to feel that you are the only one, because you're not, and there are people willing and able to help. And that's a big part of advocacy for yourself is just reaching out and saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm the poster child of what not to do. Does anyone have any ideas to make this easier for myself so I can make life easier for my care partner?
Right, and I think this is one of my pet phrases, and I know you've heard this many times before. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness; it's a sign of strength.
Yes, and I love that.
Oh goodness, Amanda, we just have a couple of minutes left. This is unfair. Time goes by too fast.
That's all right. This is only temporary, but we will move on and we will do more things. That's right.
So
on the theme of today.
Yeah. So before we close, first of all, I want to send out a debt of gratitude to you for being a part of the Whole Care Network and sharing your story, both about your mom and your dad, and the courage that you have, and I also want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience, because caregiving changed your way you were in a career, changed your focus of your career, and you are service orientated, and I know your parents would be very proud of the work that you're doing, and I'm just honored to know you.
Oh God, Chris, I'm honored to know you too, and I'm so grateful for your friendship and this opportunity and these conversations and knowing your story as well, because folks who are listening, if you haven't read or heard Chris's story, I encourage you to seek it out because it's beautiful and powerful. And I'm honored to call you a friend as well.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So before we close, let's let our listeners know how they can get in contact with you, all your website and contact information, and then we'll let our listeners know that while this is our 6th podcast of the series, we'll be sure to keep you tuned in by all of our social media outlets. But Amanda, let everybody know how they can get in touch with you.
Okay, great. Well, of course, I can be found on the Whole Care Network. My law firm is Singleton Legal. We are based in St. Petersburg, Florida. I can be found on Twitter as the Caregiver Lawyer. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing a stint on the AARP Caregiving Forums, which you can find at www.community.aarp.org. I'm available on there to answer questions and have conversations with caregivers in a nice casual way, and I'll be on there at least a couple hours every week for a little while. And the phone number for Singleton Legal is 727-458-1648, and you can email me directly at amanda@singletonlegal.com.
And
how's that?
That's really good. You got it all covered. Yeah. So, but also all your contact information as well as your podcast are available on the Whole Care Network. Just go to the wholecarenetwork.com and / the caregiver lawyer. And also, Amanda, you'll be happy to know that all your shows are on iTunes, iHeart, Stitcher, all the popular podcast platforms, so you can listen on demand at any of those famous podcast platforms. And that channel is now open for you to podcast as much as you like. So I know all listeners will be excited to hear more from you in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Well, goodness gracious, St. Ignatius, I always sad when we finish these six series podcasts, but I know we've established some great relationships and providing some terrific information. And Amanda, with all the work that you're doing in the caregiving community, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, well, that does it for this episode of Candid Conversations About Care. As you know, I'm your host, Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy. I'm creating a life to love after caregiving ends through radio, writing, travel, advocacy, and being with awesome people like Amanda Singleton. Healing Ties and Candid Conversations About Care are part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at thewholecarenetwork.com. We'll see you soon for another episode of Healing Ties. Bye-bye.